Under the scorching desert sun, a lonely woman wandered through despair. Her heart shattered, her tears dried up, and her little child slowly collapsing from exhaustion. When every door closed, when the silence of the wilderness seemed to swallow hope whole, God appeared. Not with thunder and lightning, but with a promise, a well of water, and a future no one expected. This is not only a story about abandonment, it is the story of a God who sees, who hears, and who remembers the forgotten. Watch the video and step into the miracle-filled journey of Hagar, mother of Ishmael. Night in the desert doesn't need much to become terrifying. It only takes the wind to stop blowing and the sky to feel too wide. In that vastness, a person can hear their own heartbeat more clearly than the insects. Hagar had heard a heartbeat like that many times, not because she loved silence, but because life often pushed her into places where no one stood beside her. She was Egyptian, a servant woman in the house of Abraham and Sarah. In that world, a servant woman often had only two rights: to work and to stay silent. Hagar did not have the right to choose where her life would turn. She did not have the right to say no when others decided for her. What Hagar wanted was actually small: to have peace, to be treated like a human being. But what Hagar needed, without even knowing it, was something far greater: to know that she was not invisible before God. Sarah had waited too long for a child until her faith in God turned into pain. One afternoon, when the sun tilted gold across the tent pegs, Sarah called Hagar. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the cold edge of a decision that had been incubating for too long: have no child. But you can. Sarah gave Hagar to Abraham, hoping to shortcut the promise. And that was the moment Hagar's fate became someone else's plan. Hagar stood still, her hands clenched. She understood this was not an invitation. This was destiny placed on the shoulders of someone with no power to choose. She entered Abraham's tent like someone stepping into a room with no exit. Abraham was not cruel, but sometimes even gentle people can wound others when they choose silence instead of courage. That night, Hagar could not sleep. She lay listening to the wind slipping through the seams of the tent, and one question kept drilling into her mind. If God had a promise, does that promise include someone like me? Then Hagar became pregnant, and the air in the camp changed. The first feeling was not joy. It felt like a hot secret placed in her palm. She walked through the camp and saw people's eyes shift. Now they looked at her longer, not because they respected her, but because she was carrying what Sarah did not have. Sarah looked at Hagar, and the old pain flared again. I still have no child. When pain lasts long enough, people can turn it into anger, and then pour it onto the easiest target. Hagar became the place the storm landed. The days grew heavy, more work colder, words, looks that seemed to remind her, you are only a servant. Hagar carried a child and carried pressure at the same time. She felt trapped. If she stayed, she would be crushed. If she left, she might die. Hagar endured. Then one day, she could not endure anymore. That night, she ran. She ran from the camp, from the voices, from the stairs, from the things that made her suffocate. The desert opened in front of her, an enormous blankness. The sun hung overhead like a coin of fire. With every step, her belly felt heavier, her throat drier. She had no map, only one instinct: get far away from the place that was choking her. The water in her skin pouch drained quickly, and then she stopped beside a spring in the wilderness, a rare mercy in the dry land. She collapsed, clutching her stomach, breathing like someone who had escaped a wild beast. Tears spilled. Under the vast sky, she felt so small, she might as well have been a dot. And right there, where no one was waiting for her, she was called by name. Scripture says, the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness. Genesis 16:7. And the question that came was astonishingly gentle. Hagar Sarai's maid, whence camest thou, and whither wilt thou go? Genesis 16:8. For the first time in her life, she heard her name spoken as a person. She answered, choking on her words, I am fleeing from Sarai, my mistress. And then the words that came were unlike anything she had heard in the camp. Not a command to obey, not a scolding, but a word that knew her future. Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. Genesis 16:11. Ishmael's God hears, a single name, and it was like a door opening inside her. The cry of a servant woman in the wilderness had not vanished. It had been heard. Hagar trembled. In that moment, she knew she was not invisible before God. She spoke a sentence that captured the strangest truth of her life. "Thou God seest me." Genesis 16:13. And she called that place Bir Lahai Roy, the well of the living one who sees me. Hagar returned, not because everything suddenly became easy, but because she had met the one who sees. She returned with a different kind of strength, the strength of someone who knows she has been heard and seen. Time passed. Ishmael was born. Hagar held her son, feeling that small life like a miracle soaked in tears. Abraham's camp had a child's voice, and Sarah had to live with something painful and unspeakable. The child was not hers yet. He lived right before her eyes. More years passed, and then the impossible happened. Sarah also had a child. Isaac was born like laughter breaking out after a lifetime of waiting. The camp grew louder, but also tenser. Two boys grew up in the same space, carrying two stories, two wounds, and two promises that did not look the same. Then came a feast day. Laughter filled the air, but beneath that laughter a crack opened. Sarah saw Ishmael, and something old inside her was touched again. Fear of loss, fear of being replaced, fear that her son's future would be threatened. She said to Abraham with words like a blade, "Cast out this bondwoman and her son." Abraham was torn. He did not want to lose his child. That night he lay awake. The next morning he gave Hagar bread and a skin of water and sent her away. This time she was not running. This time she was being pushed out. Hagar walked into the wilderness of Beersheba with Ishmael. The sun beat down fierce and bright. Her feet burned, and then the water was gone. Ishmael began to fade. His small steps stumbled, and then he collapsed. Hagar laid the boy under a bush, then walked away about a bowshot because she could not bear to watch her child die. She sat down, covered her face, and wept. And then the miracle happened. God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven. Genesis 21:17. Hagar heard the voice, and she looked up. "What aileth thee?" Hagar, "Fear not." Then her eyes were opened. She saw a well nearby, as if it had been there all along. Only despair had covered her sight. She ran, filled the skin with water, gave the boy a drink. Ishmael lived. Hagar lived. And they continued on, not as people merely expelled, but as people guided through the wilderness by the one who had heard and who had seen. Ishmael grew up in this desert. Hagar watched her son become strong-skilled with the bow. She saw that her life was not only a wound. She had walked through the wilderness twice, once because she was crushed, and once because she was excluded. And both times she met the same truth: God was with her. He did not abandon her. No monument was built for Hagar, but she was given something deeper than any status, a name God himself attached to her suffering. Ishmael, God hears. Hagar is a story for anyone who has ever felt they had no place in someone else's life, used, misunderstood, pushed out of what they thought was home. But Hagar also teaches us something painfully true. God does not only hear the prayers of the strong, he hears the cries of the weak. When we think we are invisible, God still calls us by name. And when we are desperate to the point that we cannot see the well, sometimes the first thing God does is open our eyes to realize the source of life has been closer than we thought. The wilderness feels like a place forgotten, yet it can become the place where God's voice calls our name most clearly. If today you are in your own desert, remember the one who called Hagar is still the one who calls you not by a title, but by your name. If you like this style of Bible storytelling, please like, share, subscribe to Fidelia Bible Stories. Comment EL ROI if you believe God still sees you.